codeine or cough syrup or heavy-duty Advil, heroin, what?
Mucinex and horse soothers, like a rock star.
Welcome to Third Degree, the podcast. This would be lucky episode number 7. At least that's how it feels already. My name is Peter, and I'm dialing in from my lonely seat in the Cotton Bowl, all by my lonesome. I'm joined by Dan Crook, who also writes for Third Degree. Greetings. And apparently, just beware, he's sick and coughing up a lung. How are you feeling, little Dan?
Not too bad, not too bad. I'm obviously calling in from the nurse's office over at Toyota Stadium.
Oh, excellent. The Baylor Rehabilitation Center, I guess, is what it is.
Well, either that or pay Dr. T.O. a visit down the road.
And filling out our trio panel today is none other than the founder and editor of Third Degree and captain of all things FC Dallas Knowledge, Buzz Carrick. Come in, Buzz.
Hello, Peter. I'm calling in from a Brazilian barbecue going on in Luchi Gonzalez's backyard.
All right. At the time of this recording, it appears that the news that we've all known for about 2 weeks now is imminent. There are reports on Twitter, along with some other things we'll talk about here shortly, that are indicators that Luchi Gonzalez is, within the next few days, going to be announced as Oscar Pereira's replacement at FC Dallas. Buzz, I will start with you. Does this surprise you in any way, shape, or form at all?
Only a teeny tiny bit. You and I and everyone else, Dan included, on this podcast has been talking about, since the idea that Oscar was leaving has been floated, we've been talking about how it was going to come down to, we were 99% sure, either Marco and Luchi. I think I in particular thought Marco had a tiniest bit of a nod ahead because of his first team pro experience versus Luchi's only academy and youth kid team experience. But I don't think any of us are remotely shocked that in the end, if it does turn out to be accurate, and I don't doubt these reports, that it is Luchi.
Like Buzz said, there was the experienced assistant or the up-and-coming academy coach. Looks like they're going young this year, so up-and-coming academy coach kind of seems like a logical fit, at least in the Hunt logic, if nothing else.
So knowing that this has been pretty much assumed by anybody who follows this team closely since the moment Oscar announced that he was, in fact, leaving the club, what do we think about the conversation and the interview with Dan Hunt, where he made a lot of noise about how they had all this amazing interest from experienced international coaches with Champions League experience and from Europe, and he was so excited and impressed with the level and quality and experience of people who had expressed an interest, and yet they end up with a guy internally who's never coached an adult in his life.
Well, I think so far, every time the Hunts have hired a coach, they've had that same conversation. They always say that they have calls from all over the world, and I don't doubt them. I'm sure people call, and they always say that lots of people want this job, and I'm sure that's true. And what it comes down to in the end is two factors, the first of which is their ability to trust somebody outside of their familiarity, and second, the one or two times that it's been reported that somebody else was high on the list, money gets in the way. And we know where this team is in terms of its hierarchy and how it functions and where the cost prices are. And it's been reported multiple times now that Tab Ramos may or may not have been the favorite, but did not progress in the process because of money. And the last time around, when Charlotte was supposed to be the favorite, that didn't progress because of money. And while they have paid once or twice to go out and get Shellis or Oscar, this is now the fifth time they've hired a coach, and every single time it's ended up being an assistant or a former academy director or Clark's coach. You know, this is their MO. This is what they do. And because of all the factors involved with this club, this is what you end up with, which shouldn't be disparaging towards Luchi, by the way. He is a highly thought of young and up and coming coach. It's just the amount of people they say they actually get talked to and they actually interview, in the end, it always distills down to somebody that they have worked with before, have hired before, and know. just how they work.
Dan, we commonly talk about the idea that when you have a question about what you think the Hunts are going to do, the most obvious answer ends up being the right one, and that appears to be correct in this case once again.
Yeah, definitely. If you want to even look at, I know NFL coaches, they always talk about coaching trees. This is another branch off the Schellas Hyndman tree. I played under Schellas Hyndman at SMU. It's not to say that Luchi is just a coach of the Schellas mold. He's a good progressive coach. You can see it in the way the youth teams play. They play very much that same style that Oscar Pereira had the first team playing. It could turn out well. Could turn out really well.
I can't quite figure out in my head how I feel about this. It just, I don't know Luchi personally. I obviously have been caught up in his success as the director of the academy and the success the academy has had across all the different age groups. It's arguably the best academy in the country, and there are many people internally in the club who, second to Oscar Pereira, point directly to his involvement with that. But then again, when I start thinking about, well, what does that mean in terms of how this guy can manage adults and professionals and egos that are making lots of money, I don't know any of us have any idea. So at the end of the day, I don't know if I should be excited, freaked out, depressed, scared. Do either one of you have any particular feeling about your reaction to this pending announcement?
Well, I would reiterate something Dan said, which is that the academies have played all the way down, very similar to the way Dallas has played as a first team for quite a few years now. You're not going to see a whole lot of change in terms of style. Now, you might be able to say that the academies replicate the first team, but it isn't just that. The emphasis is on the same kind of skill sets, the emphasis on the decision making, as Oscar has done, with his find a way, his empowerment of players for their own choices. There's not a lot of egos left on this team, frankly. They're purging guys at the top end of the older players and at the top end of the money. The guys that are left are either all really young or they're all pretty amicable fellows. This team has not had a contentious locker room in a couple of years. I don't have any doubts about Luchi's ability in and of itself. The only question mark we've always raised is that, as you say, lack of experience. And there's nothing that's happening other than it seems the youth movement is somewhat afoot anyway. So maybe it is the best time to go with Luchi. Who are we to say?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to sort of jump too far one way or the other. I feel like both Buzz and I kind of made a couple of points that sounded maybe negative, and then instinctively said, well, on the other hand, it could work out really well. Luchi is a really good coach, plays in a really entertaining brand of soccer. Whether it's the under-16, 17s that he's been coaching. I watched his under-16s pass the ball around Real Madrid's under-16s like they weren't there. Real Madrid of all teams. How that translates into the adult game, you've always got the worry of, handling adults and the respect factor, particularly as a 38-year-old. Let's be honest, adults are probably more petulant than kids when it comes to soccer players, because you can tell an under-17 to shut up. You can't tell a 23-year-old. Really, we've just got to see what happens.
Dan,
yeah, quite honestly, he's a mystery, is he not? I mean, we know so little about him beyond just the youth we've seen. It really is a blank slate. We have no idea what to expect. I mean, this could be amazing. It could be horrible. There's nothing we can point at to show, look what he did here, look what he did there. I mean, it's almost in a way sort of refreshing, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. It's like, we're just going to have to see what happens.
We've talked a lot about the concept of the Hunts making a conscious decision of embracing, the academy and their ability to grow their own fruit and Oscar was the first to really openly dream and publicly discuss this concept about, fielding an MLS team made up mostly of academy players someday. And Dan has obviously been somebody that's talked about that too. It's always been kind of in this weird dream state, but now I'm starting to wonder if Dan and Clark have decided, okay, we're going to do this, and to do this, we might as well stick with what we know. And with Luchi, we can, start this from the beginning and try to grow it this way. I mean, is that what we're really starting to see the beginning signs of?
What's funny about that is that Oscar joked with me a couple months ago about how next season you may very well see this play the kids team where you're going to have, they'll keep Hedges, but you're going to have Cannon, and now Reto's been exposed. So maybe that's Richards in the middle, and maybe Pedroso's gone, and you've got some rookie college left back they've signed. And then, Grezzo's still pretty young, but you're going to have Mosquera's like 23. You're going to have Paxton. You're going to have Cervania. You're going to have Ferreira playing. We sort of had a laugh about it, and it almost looks like that's happening. You've talked for a long time about this idea of embracing this build from within mentality and trying to sell that. That'll be a big question, of course, if they're going to try and sell it. But, the other side of the coin is that the moves that have actually happened so far, they've gotten rid of Urruti, who was a bit of a tough fit. Getting him in the lineup was tough. And then Akindelli, who was a backup, who was blocking the way for some of the young kids. So far it's not radically different, but if they hire Luchi, that screams to everybody, as you say, we're going young hard. And in a couple of years, this could be a phenomenal team stacked with young pros, but right now it's going to be some growing pains if you really are trying to force those guys in.
All right, so Dan, considering that you are our liaison back into the fan base, what do you think the general reaction by a typical Dallas fan's going to be to this announcement, if in fact it happens?
It's weird. I've seen two very distinct reactions. One of, Luchi Gonzalez hasn't coached adults, really kind of not sure what to see, and then other people who are just kind of sold in on the great, play the kids, build up a team, add some experience, and more than likely same again as it's been the last few years. There's definitely an element of the divide of people who are pro and anti-Hunt in there. But it's definitely interesting to see it so split.
Do you think there's any chance that the Hunts will get a pass on the, hey, you weren't willing to spend to get a quality coach thing because, in fact, that what they did instead was something maybe that people will see as brave or progressive or, the next step in a longer-term plan to turn this into, for lack of a better term, the FC Dallas way?
No, I think most people that don't like this hire are going to, if it is indeed Luchi, it's not 100% yet, but most people that don't like this hire are going to claim that it's cheap, that it's just because the Hunts have don't want to spend any money. I don't think Luchi's not going to get a break from people. Some of us that have talked to him and watched him coach and think he's got potential, but anybody that's a average fan, all they're going to see is they hired the cheapest, easiest to find candidate, and that's going to be tough for him. But they're not going to get a break on that.
Not only that, but if they cut the corner financially and then don't use that money or that figurative money anyway, to invest, in a goal scorer, I don't think people are going to give him a pass on that. You've got a lot of people that still don't believe that Baji will ever be a fit. You've got people that thought that Maxi was the key to it all, and trading him away is disastrous. As far as giving Luchi a pass, if they really embrace the homegrown city thing and make it, play your kids and try to win with kids, absolutely, people will give him a pass. It will turn into the new trust in Papi.
We're seeing some reports and getting some communication that all of the training has been canceled for Tuesday for all of the FCD juniors and academy training. And I guess this is, many people are speculating that they've never seen this happen before, and this is an indicator that, some announcements are going to be made in terms of Luchi and realigning everything. If you are an FC, let's think of this, let's do it this way. If you're an FC Dallas Academy or youth player, and you find out Luchi's been named as Oscar's replacement, what do you think your reaction to that is?
Oh, I would imagine they're all pretty excited. I mean, this is a guy, if you're an academy player, this is a guy that's already seen you, and is going to play a way that they're already playing, and you're already being coached under his methods. They're going to think, oh, the pathway is even more open now to success. And I don't think that's going to be a bad assessment on their part. I mean, I think the reason that you cancel all the training sessions is because if Luchi has the gig, he has to pick assistants, and then they're going to pick the USL coaches. Those coaches are likely going to be guys from the academy. It's entirely possible that every single team in the academy from top to bottom is going to have a different coach on Wednesday than they have today. And this is going to cause a massive ripple through the club. So on one level, you're probably nervous about how you're about to have a different coach. But on the other level, how exciting is it that now the guy that's been running the thing we're playing under, now that guy's in charge of the whole thing. So that'll even more dictate to kids that it is one entire complete system, top to bottom, FC Dallas down to the academy. It is one setup. Same guys are making decisions the whole way. So that's got to be attractive.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to think about is when you think about this move and the obviously rumored and pending move of Chris Richards being sold to Bayern Munich, if you're a really top quality player in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the idea of wanting to play for FC Dallas has to have gotten even more attractive and magnetic at this point.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there was a very solid pathway to the first team with Oscar. We all know that Oscar would take long walks around the training facility, watch all the youth teams, and drag us all behind him while we're trying to interview him. And that he would invite young players over to first team or even just to watch. With Luchi, those young players aren't worried about having to impress a new coach or finding a coach that potentially doesn't want to be as inclusive to young players. Now, especially with Richards, you've got this pathway to Europe, which is just unheard of in MLS.
Especially for a kid who was... It wasn't like Chris Richards was considered to be the best player in the academy when he left to go to train at Bayern.
Well, he did win Conference Player of the Year. I mean, he was pretty highly thought of. It's not, he maybe wasn't the MVP of his team, but he was one of those players that the minute he showed up at the beginning of last year, the very first session we saw him, I said something to Oscar about him, about how he took my breath away, and Oscar, grinned and was like, "Oh my gosh, yes." He and Kappas that first week were just blindingly exciting, and over the course of the time, you watch him play and you think, oh, there's a little bit of rawness there. Of course, he still needs to learn how to play, but the raw tools are amazing, and that's obviously what appeals to a team like Bayern. They took one look at his athleticism and just drooled all over themselves. We see a lot of kids like that in America. I think there's a ton of kids in the academy that look just like that. But, he was a guy that was of the right age that they could go ahead and do something rapidly, which I think is why you see something happen quick with him.
Okay, so put a pin in Chris Richards, and we'll come back to that here in a few minutes. What I want to move to now is the other piece of news that came out since the last time we talked, which almost in itself was a shocking bombshell, which is Luiz Muzzi, who was Fernando Clavillo's right-hand man and was tapped to replace Fernando Clavillo. Word got out. It wasn't announced. Word got out through the media that he is also leaving FC Dallas to go take a gig with Orlando City. So now, Buzz, fill everybody in. He hasn't left. He's still the employee of the team, and all of these moves that we'll talk about here in a few minutes are they moves made based on what is going on in these, past few days, or is Muzzi now just enacting a long-term plan that was started by Clavillo and Oscar before their departures from the club?
It's probably started out as the latter and is, of course, evolved some as the former. Essentially, he's still on the job. They haven't confirmed 100% officially that he's leaving, but they didn't deny that he was leaving either. So all signs are that he's leaving. But in the meantime, these kind of off-season moves don't happen in a 24-hour window. They start happening half a year or even a year out, really. They start planning all these things. So it certainly is true that they've had a plan in place for at least 6 months building up to this activity. And then Oscar chooses to leave. Well, the organization, the plans were never really just Oscar's anyway. They always were organizational plans. So they've taken Oscar's ideas, and the guys that are left now say, well, okay, now that Oscar's not here, do we still want to follow this route? And part of that process is, of course, who they hire as a coach. One reason why Dallas has not done anything officially is they're waiting for a coach to come on board so they can, of course, sign off on this plan. Another reason, of course, that leads to it, us all thinking all along that it was going to be a Luchi or a Marco, because you've got all these plans that are in place and you're actually activating. To then hire a guy that wasn't on board with those plans would be weird. So essentially, the people that are left, which is Muzzi and is Dan Hunt, as he says, the bottom line is him and his brother, and guys that were on staff and going to stay, which we assume is Ferruzzi because he's still doing stuff for the club. We think the Bazans are going with Oscar. I imagine that Luchi and even probably some other academy guys have been involved in these conversations. I mean, they try and talk to as many people as possible as they go forward with these things. So really, in the end, all these moves you're seeing are being done by a guy, Muzzi, who's leaving, and Dan Hunt, who's still trying to hire a coach. So it's a little bit of a chaos, but it is a plan they've had in place. None of these things should be shocking anyone inside the organization. A lot of us that observe the team can see these moves happening and go, yeah, okay, that makes sense. That up until now, in fact, every move they've made was one that I felt like would be a move I would have done, in a direction that I would have gone up until they hire the coach and up until maybe the protected list that came out today. So,
all right. So before we start getting into the specifics of moves that have been made, so the question I'm wondering is, so what you believe to be true, and Dan, if you have another thought on this, feel free to chime in, is the move of the trading of Akindele or the trade away of Arudi, or the protected list that came out today. Those are all things that you think had already been in place, and this isn't a function of Dan and Muzzi making those moves. You think that these are just continuations of ideas or plans that were already in place?
Yeah, I think that why I wouldn't necessarily call them Oscar's plan. I would say that they're probably the plan the organization had come to and was their laid out on paper plan for this winter. And between Oscar leaving and between they're thinking they're probably going to hire a coach that either is already part of the system or is super aware of the system, like Todd Ramos would have been, they're still following this plan. There's nothing that's happened so far that is radically different than what I think any of us would have expected. I mean, nothing crazy is happening.
Right. But moving forward, if something occurs or a decision that has to be made outside of a plan, should we be comforted, discomforted in knowing that the two people making decisions, one is Dan Hunt, and then the other is Muzzi, who up until 2 months ago was essentially a second in command behind Clavillo? How do we feel about those two guys making these decisions?
It's not just those two guys. You've still got Drew Keeshan, who's one of the most highly thought of coaches of at least goalkeeper coaches in the country. You've still got Marco. You've still got a lot of the guys that were making decisions. Speaking at the USL launch, everyone sort of mentioned Chris Hayden, their VP of the FC Dallas Academy system, being involved up in those decisions too. There's still a lot of consistency there.
Yeah, one thing I would say about specifically Chris Hayden is I've had several conversations with him regarding the USL team, and he would say things like, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. So I think he and Luchi, I think, have been intimately involved with this process, certainly in terms of the USL part. And I would imagine even once Oscar was looking like he was going to leave, those two guys probably were elevated in the conversation along with Muzzi and with Hunt. So in the end, whether you have faith that things are going in the right direction, I guess that's going to depend a lot on whether you like the way Dan Hint runs the team. It's the same as when Oscar was in charge. I said, if you have faith in Oscar, then give these moves a chance. And so now, if you have faith in Dan Hunt, or if you have faith in Luchi, or if you have faith that Clavillo and Oscar put a plan in place that was going to be a good plan that everyone else could act on after they left, if you like those ideas and like those names, then you have got to give them a chance. If you didn't like any of those people, then nothing we're going to tell you on this podcast is going to convince you that these are great ideas.
Yeah, I guess the question that just keeps running through my head is what we're going to see in 2019 and 2020 moving forward. Is it a byproduct of Oscar Pereira deciding he didn't want to be here anymore and Dan Hunt and company deciding to shift positions and move in a different direction, or is it just staying the course that would have been followed even if Oscar had decided to continue to be the coach for another year or 2 or 3?
Well, the only way we'll really know that answer, I think, is after we see what kind of moves Dallas makes with all the room they're creating on their roster. They've dumped a whole bunch of cap room. They've opened up 4 or 5 senior roster spots, depending on what other activities happen. There may be even more. So if they go and they sign 5 more homegrowns and they slide them into those spots, that answers the question that way. If those used for internationals coming in that excite us, that are $1 million signings, if we're looking at guys that are getting paid $1 million, maybe then we'll be more excited about maybe this is an Oscar plan that's now happening, and maybe this is a rebuild of the offense rather than a complete youth movement. Because nothing that's happened so far has indicated 100% one way or the other.
Right.
So right now we're in that weird moment of like, we don't really know what they're doing. We gotta wait for the shoe to drop, right? We gotta wait to see what they do.
Yeah, I'm assuming, and based on just logic, if in fact there were a bunch of $1 million plus or just below $1 million international top quality players on their way in the door, Oscar would still be coach here. But that's just a guess on my part. But since you mentioned it, Buzz, let's run through the moves they have made here briefly for each, and I'll start off with Maxi or Rudy. Are we surprised they've traded Maxi away from the team?
I'm not surprised. As much as I really like Maxi Urruti, and I love his defensive intensity, and I love the way the whole team fed off of his leadership, both in training and in games. There's no question that he was a hard fit in terms of a team. He's not a great 9 and he's not a great 10. And the way that Dallas tried to use him is like a 9.5 sort of. He really needed to be in a 2-striker system, and a player that's getting paid $800,000, a DP level player. They used the TAM GAM to buy him down. A player like that for some reason you're not comfortable of building the whole shape around him, which it seems like that must have been the case. It's not surprising that maybe you want to try and move on from a player like that. To me, so I think if you want to embrace Aranguiz as your number 10, which I think everybody does, and you're going to go with a single striker system, that doesn't fit Maxi Urruti. So maybe in the end, when you finish 4th place and you got to reload and rebuild, you got to move on from guys. He had a good run here. Probably was kind of time, so I don't think that's a surprise that he was gone.
Do you think Maxi would have been traded if Oscar was still coach?
I do. See, I don't think Oscar left because of any moves or players or any kind of thing. I think Oscar left only because he wanted to challenge himself at a higher level.
All right, so let's talk about the trade of Tesho, which, Buzz, you chalked up to some really smart business on the club's part.
Well, I did. I think that Tesho, at his age, has pretty much plateaued in terms of his play. He's for FC Dallas, he's an MLS backup. You were able to move him to a team that probably isn't much further down the standings, is looking to climb the standings, so serviceable player for them. For Dallas, all he was doing really was getting in the way of somebody like Jesus Ferreira or Paxton Pomykal in terms of those guys being on the bench and coming into games. So I think, while Tesho's a good role-playing veteran that makes a comfortable salary and does not complain and works hard, you need some guys like that. If you're looking to progress your youth, moving him on for some for some money and clearing some space, that's just good business in my book.
I think it's fair to actually look at both and say, could this be another case of FC Dallas also, bowing to a player's wishes? We knew Maxi wanted to go back to Newell's old boys, and the one thing stopping him was what he cited as an obligation to a two-year remaining contract with FC Dallas. Well, he doesn't have that now. He has 2 years with the league or with a team he's never actually played for. So, honor and everything, he's actually free to talk to Newell's old boys, and for the convenience matter of it, Montreal give up their pick and everything and get a little bit of money for it. And then Tesho, he's recently lost his place in the Canadian national team to Balu Tabla, the player who went to Barcelona B. He's not going to get that place back unless he's playing some kind of competitive soccer, and USL 1 probably isn't going to cut it.
There was some eyebrows raised at the low price for which Maxi Urruti was moved on for. And there was also some language in there that created some questions as to whether or not maybe there was some ulterior reasoning behind this move, Dan, and per your idea that maybe Maxi isn't long for MLS in general. Is there any other further consideration that maybe he may only be in Montreal for a short period of time?
Absolutely. It kind of seems like they've, the 50% of any transfer fee, if he leaves the league before a ball's kicked, that means Montreal's got, 3 months to kind of pitch him on the idea of living in Canada with his wife and his baby, even further away from home and further away from, a Hispanic base that he's had at FC Dallas and fellow Argentines that he's had at FC Dallas. It seems like he wants to go home, and, that language in the contract makes it seem more likely than if anything.
And maybe it's slightly overreading, but he is in Argentina. And sometimes once those guys go home, it can be a little bit harder to pry them back out of there. I mean, in and of itself, it doesn't mean anything. But it does make, if he gets all bullheaded about it, that could factor in.
We call that the Nedyalkov move.
Yeah, exactly. Castillo did something similar, although that was more to Turkey than anywhere else.
All right, so Buzz, the protected list came out today, and I think all of us were pretty much in line with those that were protected. But I think the real noise and the real conversation was the somewhat surprising move to leave unprotected 2 of the 4 key players in Dallas's outstanding defense last year in Rito Ziegler. One of the best signings this club's ever made, and 2, Marquinhos Pedroso, the left back.
Yeah, they're both kind of surprising. Now, in the club's defense, they posted a piece written by Carter Baum, who walked through their logic, and I can buy some of their logic. They both have big salaries. Reto's on $800, and he is 32 years old. Pedroso contract is escalating. Apparently, that $300 he was on is apparently only half a season, so he'll be over $500. But in the modern league, and Pedroso being 25 is a big deal. In the modern league, $500,000, $800,000 for starting level players, and not just like okay, but like legit championship contending level players. I mean, Reto was part of rebuilding one of the best defenses in the league. Pedroso over the last half of the season was one of the best left backs in the league. And you're talking about a left back now. That is really hard to find. There's not one in the FCD system that I've seen that's anywhere within 5 years of being a pro, if ever. So if they lose either one of those guys, who's going to play center back? There's been a couple of names from South America thrown around, but we don't know anything about those guys. If Pedroso's gone at left back, if he gets picked, you're going to end up with Ryan Hollingshead as your starter next year for the whole season. It's just those. I get the risk management that they talked about, where Cincinnati spent a certain amount of money. They both require international spots, which don't usually go very far in terms of the expansion draft. But as Dan pointed out to us earlier, don't forget the trade part of all of this. There is a whole day for people to look over these lists, and it's entirely possible that somebody that's looking to rebuild their club could look at a Ziegler or a Pedroso and say, man, I can get a piece that can be the cornerstone of my rebuild. Why don't I call up Cincinnati and say, hey, draft that guy for me and I'll give you X, Y, or Z for him, So there's definitely some risk reward here in terms of the guys that they exposed.
Is there any raised eyebrows over the fact that they did protect both of their goalkeepers in Jesse Gonzalez and Jimmy Marr?
Well, I don't know about raised eyebrows, but there has been rumors occasionally that some people in Mexico have their eye on Jesse Gonzalez. So it's not surprising that with those ideas out there that you could want to protect both, because this way you could sell one or the other of them and still have a pretty good keeper left behind.
I mean, there's obviously, Jimmy Mara was expected to be picked up just on the basis of Cincinnati needing a goalkeeper, and actually does having two starting quality keepers. And they've signed their current keeper, and then when you look around the league at the exposed list, you've got Chris Seitz, you've got David Osted, you've got Mitch Hildebrand, their goalkeeper for the big US Open Cup win over Chicago in 2017. If there was any element of a gamble of protect both goalkeepers and stop Cincinnati selecting one, doesn't seem worth it now.
Okay, so the other element of this is comes from Dan Hunt's interview, where he made the claim that he thought that by the end of the year, in fact, I think he even said by Christmas time, that he wouldn't be surprised if the team hadn't signed. And I don't remember the specific number of players. Was it 1? Was it 4? I don't remember. But he essentially was saying, "Hey, look, we've got our eyes on some guys coming in, and don't be surprised if they showed up sooner or later." Do we have any idea, 1, the number of them, 2, the quality of them, or 3, maybe specifically anybody by name?
Well, he said that they've been working on guys for about 6 months, which basically means since the midseason. And he said a couple by Christmas, and that over the course of the winter, it would be anywhere from 2 to 4 players that would come in. I did ask specifically about a number 9, a goal-scoring number 9. And he said that was, yes, something they've been looking at, although then we had a discussion about, high volume scores versus balance scoring, but that's a completely different issue. So I don't know exactly what positions, but we did talk about a 9. You can look at who they've jettisoned. They've jettisoned Urruti. If they're talking about playing Barrios as a 9, like they mentioned, maybe they're looking at another wing. If they're exposing a center back and a left back, maybe they're looking at some defense. If they're going to sell a keeper, maybe they're looking at a keeper. So, it's without him telling us what kind of direction they're going, we kind of are in a wait and see mode. I think we've all talked about how they might need a number 8, kind of linking kind of player. So whether they would sign one of those or whether they want to try and mix in a Cervania or not is a big question. So I think there'll be some activity. I agree that it'll be probably more than 2 and probably as many as 4. I don't know that he's going to beat his Christmas window like he thinks he's going to, but it's possible.
Did he spend any time trying to sell you on the Mikey Barrios as the next Duncan Ferguson?
No,
argument?
we didn't get into that aspect, but he did mention that before. We didn't get into that again, but I don't really like that idea. They have done that. I mean, they did that late in games occasionally. I don't think it really worked all that well, but well, a lot of that's going to be determined by, not to go back to him again, but if you're going to hire a coach, the coach is going to have some say about that. So a lot that he did. Dan Hunt specifically said that while they have these signings lined up, they need to get the coach on board first to sign off on these signings that they're bringing in.
Okay, and before we get into the USL thing, I guess the question I'm wondering is if, in fact, Luchi Gonzalez is the coach, the person that replaces Pereira as coach, can we then, is the running assumption going to be that Paxton Pomykal, Brandon Cervania, if he returns, Chris Richards, and this is, pulling the pin out and bringing this back up, are any of these other, Jesus Ferreira are probably the 4 or 5 that I'm thinking of off the top of my head. Are we going to assume that not only are they going to get more playing time in 2019, they are likely to be regular starters, period, throughout the season, record be damned?
Well, I think Orangi's right away is a starter now. Paxton will be in a heavy rotation with Barrios and Santiago Mascara.
As a wide midfielder.
Yeah, probably mostly for Paxton, wide left. Some of the assistant coaches talked to me about the stuff that he did at the U20s and how good he looked on the left and how comfortable he looked on the left and how much they really liked it. So I think that's kind of because Paxton most of this year spent his time as a number 10 in training. And we've seen him some on the right. I think that the idea of using him on the left kind of was like, oh, that really works. So I think he might get a lot of time on the left, but in rotation with Mosquera and Barrios. Obviously, how much will depend on how healthy all those guys are, because Mosquera so far can't stay healthy, and how much Barrios is going to play up top versus on the wing. Ferreira, for me, moves into a first off the bench kind of role. And some of that might also depend on how much of a striker we see them sign, if they sign one at all. So Ferreira is the real question. Will a Luchi's team don't use two holding midfielders in the academy? They use a pure holding midfielder, and then they use either in a sort of a 4-1-2, with two kind of linkers, or a linker and a 10, more of that kind of setup. So if it is Luchi, or if it's somebody else, it's not official yet, I think that's a really big question is, will Luchi or whoever go with more of a linker, which might make Brandon Cervania and potentially Ja'Cory Hayes. I mean, Ja'Cory Hayes played further up the field in college. He was more of a linker playmaker. So those two guys might be under the microscope in the spring of, can one of those dudes become a starter at the expense of Grezzo or Ulloa?
In terms of other players, so first off, do we think Chris Richards is coming back to FC Dallas? I know Dan Hunt was very adamant with you, Buzz, that he was not being sold to Bayern, despite some reports otherwise.
Yeah, Dan was very adamant of that, and when the deal first happened to send Richards over there, both Oscar and a couple other people I talked to said, that he has a chance to go play with the Bayern U19s, which will be better than what he has over the summer, which is nothing, and will be better than the FC Dallas U19s, which is pretty much the only thing he was going to get if he'd have stayed here. So the idea was that we're going to loan him over there until the end of December, and then we'll bring him back to get him ready for the spring. And not that he would start this year, but that he would be in the A team probably pretty frequently and would get a lot of action. Because if he comes back, he's your number 3 center back right behind Hedges and Ziegler, and should be starting some handful of games, and you should see him get some playing time. So I think there's actually a fairly good chance that he'll come back. I mean, Bayern does really like him, but the expression that was used to me when the deal was first made was that the amount of money it took to buy him was a lot, that it was a fat stack. So, you see these reports of like they're trying to negotiate or finalize or whatever. It may be that they don't want to pay what the negotiated price was, and they're trying to get Dallas to come down a little bit. I mean, Bayern used him a lot to promote their tour. Oh, look, we got a young American. Yay. I think that there's a pretty good chance that he comes back.
And I didn't mean to get into this whole Bayern relationship, but Dan, at some point, don't we all expect that there's somebody, a young, either international or German player from the Bayern system headed back this way to come play some quality football for FC Dallas's starting 11 at some point? Shouldn't we be expecting that? And is it possible that any of these, 4 guys they're signing are actually coming backwards from Germany?
That was an interesting pronunciation of football. It seems like there's going to hit a point where either the relationship isn't quite working out, or there's going to suddenly be some talent sent over. It's like the shoes on the other foot from the OKC Energy USL affiliate deal. Certainly, looking at the Richards deal, it's even possible that Bayern say, great, give us first consideration when you're ready to sell him, and keep him for a year or two, because all we'd do is loan him back to you or stick him in the under 23s anyway. In terms of players coming in from Bayern, I think Buzz had mentioned that they were supposedly close to getting a striker before the start of last season or the summer window. That didn't quite pan out. When you look through the team, there are a couple of players, even a couple with American passports that are struggling for minutes at various levels and could be worth looking at. the one name that stuck out there was always Timothy Tillman. As an American, he was struggling for minutes. He opted to take a loan to the second or third league and then still didn't get any minutes. So maybe he'd have a change of heart. There was a Dutch guy whose name has completely escaped me he'd just aged out at the under-19s but was nowhere near ready for the under-23s. That would kind of be, looking at a bench role in MLS, low cost. Obviously, it's an international spot, but if there's a few of those to spare, then you don't mind it too much.
All right, so before we move on to the USL news and our thoughts about that, let me just ask you both your opinions about what we anticipate is going to happen. Let's assume that Luchi Gonzalez sometime in the next few days or week is announced as the coach of FC Dallas moving forward. What do you think transpires out of that?
You mean in terms of the direction the team's going to take?
Yeah, I mean just overall.
Yeah. I think that the Hunt HSG FC Dallas MO has been established. They're going to sign guys that are in their low 20s, whether it be a guy as young as Castillo or a guy as old as 21 like Aranguiz or 22 like Mosquera. They'll sign a couple of more guys like that this winter that are going to be hopefully in positions where Dallas has a need. They're going to sign maybe one homegrown. Maybe they'll use a couple of the homegrown signings to circumvent the draft, poach a couple of their own guys like they've done the last couple of years. Players that do that have a very short window. They only get a season or two because by the time they're 24, they have to have proven themselves. But and I think you're going to see the team do what it always does, which is buys a 21-year-old Diaz, sells him when he's 27. I mean, that's what this club is. That's what this club's going to keep doing. Luchi says even more that that's going to be the case. They're going to stock the academy team with a bunch of the U23 USL team with a bunch of academy guys that are willing to sign. They'll play some guys up that won't sign because they want to protect their college eligibility. They'll send down a couple of homegrowns. And the team's going to continue pretty much like it is. We're basically resetting the offense and going forward.
Dan, you feeling gloomy and blue about this or optimistic and sunny?
Well, as you alluded to, I'm English, so we're never optimistic and sunny. Yeah, it kind of seems par for the course. One thing I would add is that when we were at the USL launch the other day, Dan Hunt did say he expected to name a coach early this week. So by the time this is out, maybe there's a press release with Luchi Gonzalez's name on it.
So you're not by nature optimistic.
Yeah, if you say have a good day to me, I kind of have a panic. I'm like, good day? I can't even guarantee the next 15 minutes.
So what I'm asking you is, do you think if in fact he's the coach, this is a good solution or a crappy solution? Just answer the question, Dan.
Can I plead the fifth? It's honestly, it's one of those situations you just look at and you say, I have no idea. The first week of March is going to roll around and it could be a dumpster fire or it could be something that looks like a really half-hearted imitation of the class of 92.
I'll go one further and I'll say that if they hire Luchi, that means that they're going to continue their emphasis on buying young, whether it be foreigners or whether it be domestic players, and that this season is going to be tough because unless you bring in a couple of really salty veterans to sort of fill up the front ranks, if you're going to go with young guys and young signings, it's going to be painful. I don't think you're going to make the playoffs unless you reload in a way that we don't think that they're reloading.
So, and you guys may have more insight than I do to this, and I didn't mean to get off track into this, but I think it's important to ask. If, in fact, you make it clear publicly that you are a team focused on developing and playing young guys from your academy system, doesn't that by nature make it harder to bring in top quality, good senior international or foreign players? I mean, aren't those types of guys probably less likely to want to come here if they know, in fact, that what they're going to be playing alongside are teenagers and guys with very little playing experience? And the odds of winning a championship are vastly reduced.
Well, yeah, but that's already true. I mean, you already can't sign a prime of their career, at least at FC Dallas, 27 to 30-year-old player. You can sign, 21 to 23-year-old players, and you can sign 31 to 33-year-old players. You can't. The Hunts don't afford or pay for guys in the prime of their career at the top of their game. It just doesn't happen. So it's definitely true that it makes it even harder to do it if your reputation is we're going to play a bunch of kids, but they don't do it anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, so buy low, sell high. You can't buy low in the prime of somebody's career.
All right. So I don't want to. I feel like this next topic could be a podcast all unto itself because it's got so many weird tentacles to it, and maybe we'll start on it today, and if we feel like we didn't touch enough of it in the next 10 minutes, we can pick up again in podcast number 8. Earlier this week, we were treated to the news that we were all anticipating, as FC Dallas was announcing the branding of the long-anticipated and much-desired USL 1 team. And we were, I think, somewhat surprised that the name of the club will, in fact, be North Texas Soccer Club.
Well, you predicted it would be Texas, actually, so I give you credit for that. I do agree with your overall point that you have said several times, is that what's important here is that there now is a USL under 23 team, and that, and at least in my opinion, that the first guy they signed is Ricardo Pepi. But they could have called it anything and we wouldn't care. Well, we actually do care. It's just compared to the other two things, it's not nearly as important.
Well, okay, hold on. Let's hold on one sec. Let's break this up into two pieces. We can talk about the business aspect of it and the on-field aspect of it. So, since we've talked so much on-field stuff lately, let's start with the business part of it, which is the branding, the logo, the name. My first question is, and maybe Dan, you have some insight to this. Why do we think they chose to give this particular team a completely different brand away from the rest of the club?
Well, that's one of those head-scratching Hunt decisions. I mean, obviously, they kind of owe a lot to Collin County. That's their primary marketing area, only marketing area. And going with a Dallas-based name kind of is not something they want to do because it does upset the city of Frisco, strangely. Likewise, I probably didn't want to go with a Frisco-based name because everybody knows the old joke of FC Frisco. So it's probably the compromise there. And then in terms of, FC Dallas has a bad name among youth teams because FC Dallas comes in and plucks up the best players. If you go to play for North Texas SC, while you're as a 17-year-old playing for a youth system while debating going off to the academy system or doing whatever, it's probably more appealing.
I figured there was actually a conversation at some point where FC Dallas likes this Texas iconography of late. The jerseys, the Lone Star, all that stuff. So I figure they even have this tagline where they say they want to be the club of Texas, right? So they're like, great, we're going to name it Texas FC or SC or whatever we're going to go. And so there's a conversation that happened where they called the USL and they said, we got a name. We're going to be Texas Soccer Club. Now, why soccer club instead of football club? I don't know. That's a whole different conversation. But they said, we're going to be the Texas Soccer Club. And the USL thought, man, we'd like to have a team in Houston eventually. No, you can't be Texas. Okay, we'll be North Texas. And that's how I figured that conversation went. It's like they wanted to have a separate name for whatever reason. I assume it's some sort of business entity reason. I don't know. And then they wanted, okay, we'll be Texas. Yes, we're the Texas Club. And then USL said, no, you can't be Texas Club. So, okay, we'll be the North Texas Club.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Dan, go ahead.
There may also be a little petty element in it. There is the USPL or UPSL, whichever it is, Club Texas United, which was founded by a former academy coach who was let go by FC Dallas. In calling the team North Texas SC, it's kind of a big middle finger to him. Now we've all certainly had experience with FC Dallas that makes us say, are they that petty? Yes, they are.
Yeah, I think there's a case to be made, and I thought about this because when I first started asking the question, I suddenly hit myself over the head and said, well, duh, Sporting Kansas City did this when they renamed their USL team Slope Park Rangers. And there was it has since come to understanding that not only the big reason why Kansas City did that was, in fact, Buzz, to your point, a business reason, because if you have a different branded name, you can sell different opportunities, right? Because the way these business relationships and sponsorships work in terms of branding go, you say, hey, I'm your official. Yeah, I don't know. I'm your official cell phone of the team for one team. If you give another team a completely different brand, well, suddenly now you can go out and sell that to a different cell phone company. So that was how it was explained in part as to why Kansas City did it. And I have to assume the Hunts thought, wait, we can sell more sponsorships? That would totally make sense as to the reason why they chose to go away from the FCD brand. I thought in part of what I thought they were trying to do, in the back of my mind, my conspiracy theory is maybe they finally realized FC Dallas was a hindrance in terms of a brand, and this was a larger part of a bigger branding overhaul we would see over a course of time. And then, of course, I saw the name, and then maybe even worse, that godforsaken logo they launched, and I thought, no, they're not doing that. So, and then I thought, well, maybe they just realized this is just one team. Maybe it doesn't last forever. So, if it doesn't last forever, we would want to be able to put it in a position where we can shove it out of the way, burn it, get rid of it, and have it not impact the FC Dallas name and brand overall.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that angle. That what if it doesn't work angle, and they're not the only team that's going this route, by the way. Like Seattle. I hear is rebranding their second team and moving it to Tacoma. It's going to be Tacoma something. So, there's other reasons to embrace these other names. And in particular, with this team, they're not locked in yet to playing at Toyota Stadium, right? They're playing their home opener at Toyota Stadium, and then they're looking for other venues to play at. And I actually asked Matt Denny, who's their general manager for business things, about that. And I said, are you guys going to play satellite games like literally all over North Texas? Might we see like a Midland game or an El Paso game? And he said, yeah, that's absolutely in the cards and on the table. So they may not in the end go through with that, but part of the idea of this branding is that it isn't just going to be Dallas. So they're going to move it all over the place and play games. I mean, their long run goal is to have a venue of their own somewhere else. And I'm assuming they mean not in Frisco. So we'll have to see how they go with this thing, but some of the branding has to do with that idea that they really do want to have a separation on some level from the senior team, even though we all know it's basically one giant organization with players moving up and down through whatever bizarre Byzantine rule systems they have for this USL League One setup.
And Buzz, they are getting they're not wearing the same jerseys as FC Dallas, correct?
Correct. They're going to have a uniform of their own. My guess is that it's going to have a slash because Dan Hunt made a really big deal about the slash across the middle of the shield. We'll have to see what happens, but they're definitely going to have a uniform of their own for sure. And they said that the reason one of the big reasons they picked League One is that the rules are very flexible in terms of moving guys up and down. And they're going to be hyper aggressive about game after game after game. Guys are going to come down from the MLS team, go up from the academy. Every single game is going to be different for this team. It's going to have huge flexibility of roster on it.
All right. And as I said in the onset, at the end of the day, I really don't care about the name, and I ultimately don't care about the branding because I'm just glad they finally executed on this and have formulated the team. But I have to say, our good friend Mike Miller, the graphic artist, probably said it best when he saw the logo and said, this club just doesn't have any style. And that's probably the best way to state our reaction overall to the North Texas Soccer Club logo. Right, Dan?
Yeah, yeah, it looks like something if you play FIFA or Pro Evo, it's one of those generic clubs where, some designer's taken 5 minutes to do a generic thing. What I found kind of interesting was that Dan Hunt was really proud to say that, the Hunts didn't reach out to a branding agency or a marketing team. They also don't have a full-time graphic designer on staff. They just had their photographer whip something up, and it's got that feel about it that it's not a graphic designer, even to the degree where it's got that NT. Well, that to me looks like Tennessee. That doesn't say North Texas to me.
When I saw the logo initially, I didn't even see the N. I couldn't see it. I was so confused by the design. I've had 100 people ask me my thoughts about the logo, and the only word I can use for it is bizarre. It's the most bizarre design I've ever seen for a logo in a really, really long time. It doesn't, none of it makes any sense to me whatsoever. But, again, clearly they don't care about that stuff. And they never have, frankly, right?
There is actually a variation of that logo online as well, that they've put out. Probably maybe even one of the earlier drafts where the N is a slightly different color. That may have just been a color correction issue. That may have been an early draft and somebody sent the wrong one out. But you can, not having an outline or something, it's like picking out the arrow in the FedEx sign or one of those subliminal marketing messages that ultimately mean nothing and no one ever notices.
There is one tiny element that I do like in the Shield, just to bring in a positive note.
That they use soccer instead of football?
No. Actually, I don't like that because it's an inconsistent branding message. You should have stuck with everything through the whole deal. But the one consistent element I like actually is that the NTSC part is on a logo, is on a shield that's the same shield from the FC Dallas logo. So the maintenance of that shield shape from the FC Dallas logo to this logo, that's the one element I like.
Wait, I'm confused. What element is the same?
Yeah, the NTSC, the red part, that red shield shape is the FC Dallas logo shape.
Oh, inside the circular badge, the shield
Yeah,
shape.
the red shield is the FC Dallas red shield. So that's a consistent brand piece that transits in both. So that's the one thing I like.
Speaking of elements that were taken from the FC Dallas logo, those leaning stars are really badly used. If they'd have done something like, forget the little Tennessee thing, put the state of Texas in white or blue, and then use that little leaning star over Frisco, that looks great. Putting two stars that look like they're slightly drunk and pointing off at Pluto, off to the sides, it's weird.
Yeah, it's not anything I think any of us are particularly proud of. And again, ultimately, it's not important because they did put a team together. But you think about the level of effort and thought and design that was put into what Kansas City did with Slope Park Rangers, which is kind of a cool name. It's tied back into the community. It had meaning for Kansas City, sporting Kansas City fans, and then the jerseys and the style all was really, really good. And it was like, you know what? They really put some thought into it, or at least gave it an equitable amount of thought that they put into the jersey designs for sporting Kansas City. And then you see this and you're like, well, I guess if I think about it, it's about the same thing they do for FC Dallas.
Yeah, Kansas City is always really good at branding. I mean, I know a couple of their in-house graphics and design kind of guys, and they're really good.
Yeah, I guess it's just too much to think that maybe someday, somehow, Dallas will, the Hunts will ever grab any sense of style, but I guess it's never going to happen.
I wouldn't hold my breath.
Well, ironically, FC Dallas did have a really good designer, and she is now on the staff at Sporting Kansas City.
Okay, so on the field, in terms of USL, you alluded to this a little bit earlier, Buzz. Nobody should get their hopes up that this is going to be some sort of championship design team, or even a team whose priority is to go out and win games.
Yeah, the priority here is absolutely not to win games. Now let's be frank about that. In the context of any given game, the coach is going to try and win. But the whole point of this team is not to win. The point of this team is to develop players. So this team's going to be a conglomeration of homegrowns coming down to get teams. I doubt you'll see anybody over the age of 22, 23, unless they're on a rehab assignment, trying to come back from injury. You're going to see a whole bunch of academy kids that are either going to sign like Ricardo Pepi did, or they're going to come up and play for free. Now don't get me wrong, the level of the third tier of soccer in the United States, this team probably is going to win a lot of games, but their goal is not to win a championship. Their goal is not to win a whole bunch of games. Their goal is to produce MLS level pro players. That's the whole point. Nothing else matters except for that. Turning out pros that makes FC Dallas's MLS team better. And that's true of the academy as well. And they have a side goal of finding guys who aren't pro players, college careers. They want to help everybody. But in the end, the goal is to take their 4 or 5 best academy kids and turn them into pros. This is just a part of that.
There's a whole conversation that I want to have about the concept of the Hunts actually doing the embracing the academy and building a team from its own farm system concept, and why I personally believe that is that's the plan that makes the most sense for this club, based on how the Hunts like to spend money or don't like to spend money, and the fact that they've spent so much time and effort building this academy system and wanting to sell on players. I think that all makes sense. But then I start thinking about, well, are soccer fans in Dallas going to have any interest in following that? And my initial reaction is the way that they fail to tell their story, and the way they fail to market and promote themselves today. I think the answer is no. I think if they follow the plan and they don't do the other components of what I'm about to talk about, I think it's the worst attended team in the league. That said, if the Hunts were to put some time and effort and spend some money and put the work in to embrace the rest of the soccer community and make all of the clubs a part of what it is they're building, and be inclusive of the entire North Texas soccer community, and they tell their story properly as to why fans should care about this and why they should want to buy tickets and come to it, and create an amazing game day experience, I absolutely believe in this community's interest in the game enough, and I know they're smart enough soccer fans to fill 20,000 seats 17 times a year. I absolutely believe that can happen. Why? Because if Atlanta can do 50,000 people 17 times a year, good Lord, in this community, which is one of 3 soccer hotbeds in the United States, we can do 20,000 people 17 times a year. I absolutely believe it. But it's going to take a fundamental sea change in how the Hunts do the off-the-field part of their business, and that includes making the rest of the soccer community the other clubs that they compete against and work alongside of, and aren't just their landlords for, and getting them to understand that what they're building includes them and is not beyond them.
Yeah, they want to be Ajax of Amsterdam, right? And that's a story that everyone likes. Everybody knows that club. Everyone thinks that's a great club, And part of that methodology is, of course, winning championships like Ajax does. But the Ajax then turns around and sells a guy for $5 or $10 million too. So that's an embraceable identity. And I think you're 100% correct that you could pull that off on North Texas. The key part of it, as you say, is you got to figure out how to get the whole North Texas community to embrace your club. Because right now that's not true. And if you can get that to happen, if you can figure out how to make that happen with the rest of all the academy teams out of this part of the world and the rest of all the youth teams in this part of the world, then I think you're really onto something.
Yeah, and I wonder if it doesn't start with the USL team, where you stop getting all the other clubs to look at you as a potential predator and poacher of their players, and you turn to them and say, hey, look, we're not interested in taking your players. What we want you to know is that if you have a player that ends up being a pro potential player, they can come to us when you're ready to let them come to us, and we can help them go to the next level that maybe your own club can't do. There's a way to build that relationship with the rest of the youth community in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that is collaborative and not predatory.
I mean, the most important thing they could do might be to go to all those clubs and say, if you let us sign your players to our USL team, then if we sell them on, we will cut you in on the action instead of cutting them out on the action. If they can create a partnership with the other academies and pass guys through, because there are some talented players in those other academy teams. It's not all FC Dallas. If you can get some of those guys to come through your North Texas branding, right? If you can get that going and get that partnership going and use your solidarity payments and pass the buck, man, help everybody out, then I think you could get everybody on board. It would be exciting.
You know, I want to be fair back to the Hunts in that the relationship back into the North Texas soccer community is very much a two-way street. And the bad blood that flows between FC Dallas and the rest of the community isn't just singularly the Hunts' fault. It is definitely a system where everybody's got to trust each other and work with each other better. But I unfortunately think for Dan and Clark, it's going to have to start with them taking a lead position on how that community can work together to not only just improve the overall soccer community in North Texas, but also make their situation better as kind of the point of the spear of this soccer hotbed, for which it very much is, for both boys and girls, by the way. I think that's also important to say, is that this isn't just about guys soccer. This also includes the women's game as well.
Yeah, which brings us back to the idea that Dallas needs to run a top flight, FC Dallas needs to run a top flight women's team. You know, they need to take their, is it ENCL? Is that what it is, Dan? They need to take that team up another level, I believe.
WPSL.
To whatever the top flight of the women's game is, because that's always in flux in the United States. But I think FC Dallas, in a way, sort of owes it to the community to run a quality women's program as well.
Well, that's the thing. They also have an amazing women's program up until the age of 19. I mean, you've got players like Reina Reyes going off with the Mexican national team. You've got any number of players. I think at some point last year when I spoke to Tyler Powell, the head coach of the WPSL team, he said they'd had a week where they had 26 call-ups to national teams.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, you need to capitalize on that with the women's team that and pay that off with the women's team that plays at the highest level. Yeah,
it's kind of been an issue, and it goes back to the Hunts again. You know, the first 3 years of the WPSL team, I mean, I remember speaking to Dan Hunt, and he actually denied the existence of the team.
I'm sure he probably just misunderstood. Well, I think, guys, what we can all agree upon is that we are facing a very watershed moment for this club's future. And what happens over the next few days, it will, by and large, be transformative for better or worse for what we see in the next year or two and forward. Agreed?
Yeah, I think we can agree. This is a moment of great balance where it could go either way. So we're going to find out. It's going to be fun.
All right. Dan Crook, thank you for your time. I hope you're feeling better, and whatever medication you're about to dive into goes as planned.
Safe than sorry.
Buzz, outstanding work once again. You are the leader. And oh, by the way, aren't you doing a Ask Me Anything on Reddit, on the FC Dallas Reddit page sometime soon? Do you have a date for that yet?
Yeah, we're looking at Wednesday. It's not written in pen yet, but probably on Wednesday.
Wednesday this week, that would be the 12th.
Yes, the 12th.
And do you have a time or anything?
Not yet. That was just the first day we threw out, and so far that seems like that day will work.
And Ask Me Anything. Buzz, that's big time, dude.
Well, it's nice to get to ask, so it'll be fun. We'll do it.
All right, thanks for listening, and we will talk to you again here in the next week or so, or maybe as soon as a coach is announced, which means it could be literally in the next 24 hours. All right, thanks for listening. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.